So good morning, everyone, and welcome. Glad you could be with us today for Words Matter, Effective Communications that Constrain Contamination. We're going to have a great presentation from Keysha Burton with the Recycling Partnership. Before we get started, however, I'd like to just take a minute here to introduce myself. I am the Executive Director of the Maryland Recycling Network. My name is Peter Haustel. Keysha, Director of Community Infrastructure Programs for the Recycling Partnership, will be taking over the mic shortly. Before we go there, though, I want to let everyone know that we have some great events coming up with the Maryland Recycling Network. On Tuesday, November 15th, which also happens to be America Recycles Day, we will be celebrating MRN's 30th birthday. Now, it's actually the 31st birthday, and we were going to have a party last year, but there was that pandemic thing. You remember that? That pandemic thing? Anyway, that sort of pushed things off. So we're going to do that at Turf Valley on Tuesday, November 15th. And then on Thursday, January 26th, Swarupa Ganguly from the EPA will be talking about their national recycling strategy, and some funding that is now available will be available for local markets development, which I think should get people excited around here. We are all trying to find a way to make our recycling systems offset the expenses a little better perhaps than they do today. And then Monday, June 12th, we will be at the Turf Valley Conference Center for the annual conference we co-sponsor with the SWANA Mid-Atlantic folks. So I hope you will all mark your calendars for these events. And we have a few other webinars coming up as well. We'll be doing a reuse webinar. We'll be doing a markets update probably in February. And we'll be bringing back Crystal Dreisbach from Don't Waste Durham later on in the spring to talk about the program that she's put together down there. Really wonderful reuse program that is fascinating because it's scaling up pretty substantially from the typical systems we see, which are on the small side. On the admin side, there is a chat button on your toolbar where if you want to ask a question, please feel free to post it in chat. We'll also have an opportunity for Q&A at the end. We'll make sure that we can get to all your questions before we get through the entire presentation. The presentation will be recorded and posted on the MRN website after the event is over. And for those of you who submitted your SWANA ID, I'll be submitting your names to SWANA for CEU credit. So, and if you didn't, just go ahead and send me an email with that information. I'll make sure it gets included. Okay, so that's the admin stuff. I just want to make sure we shout out our patrons and sustaining members, Infinity Recycling, Fort Schumann, the Maryland, Delaware, DC Beverage Association, Tech Safe Recyclers, and Waste Management at the top of the heap as patrons. My company, Mariner Management, MSW Consultants, and Northeast Maryland Waste Disposal Authority are our sustaining members. If anybody is not on that list and wants to be on that list, that would be wonderful. Just give me a call, send me an email, carrier pigeon, whatever you want to do to let us know you'd like to participate in this way. Before I turn the mic over to Keysha, I want to do a real quick little poll with everybody. So we're going to just sort of test get your fingers warmed up and test your knowledge, perhaps. Let's see what we got here. We want to know, what is the EPA estimate for the US recycling contamination rate, the percentage of items collected but not recyclable? Oh, and I see some folks are very pessimistic about the quality of our recycling. Greater than 50%. Wow. I guess you saw Greenpeace's plastics recycling piece, which apparently they have now taken back. They've said, well, we didn't mean it. We weren't serious. Okay, so we have just about everybody has responded at this point. I got one more, I got a couple more. Anybody else want to click in? Last chance. Okay, we're going to end this poll right here and share the results. So, according to what I discovered on Google, which is the source and the font of all knowledge, the EPA rate is supposedly around 25%. Keysha, does that sound about right to you? You're still muted, so you might want to fix that microphone.
Trying to get my other screen back up.
Yeah.
So we don't actually go by recycling rate in the traditional sense that the EPA does, because their denominator accounts for all material stream, and we have adjusted to look at contamination from a capture rate percentage instead. So we're really just looking at the total recyclables that could actually be collected in its entirety.
Mhm.
And we're measuring that against what is actually being generated or collected from households. So, but in terms of the EPA's number, yes, they are about correct. Do they align with our capture rate number? Probably not.
So what's your number? Or do you want to shoot that later?
We're trying to assess that now, but I would say we're gauging higher, maybe
Okay.
40% or so. But
Oh,
also, yeah, in terms of what is capturable from
right.
the actual material that could be recycled, we don't account waste into our denominator.
Okay, well, I guess we all have some work to do, and we'll have to depend upon Keysha to help us get that work done. So I'm going to go right to our next slide and say, Keysha, the mic and the screen are all yours. So share away and rock and roll.
Wonderful. You all see my screen?
Beautiful.
My presentation, wonderful. So good morning. I'm going to move off of this because we've already done an introduction slide, and this basically just gives you a highlight as to what we're going to talk about, which is dropping it low, and dropping it low being recycling or contamination rates. So I'm Keysha Burton. I am a director of community programs or infrastructure programs with the Recycling Partnership. This is a snippet of our core values as our guiding light as an organization, and how our team in its individuality manages themselves as they're working with communities, but also that guides our overall organizational goals and missions and values. So I just added this in here because I love our core values, and they are really a guiding light for us. But I also want to highlight that the Recycling Partnership is a 501c3, so we are a nonprofit and we are formed for the public good. Our overall goal is to make it as easy for all, I like to say community residents, because when we say Americans, it could be exclusionary, and when we say resident, it doesn't feel very warm or denotes like everyone in our community, those who may be undocumented as well, but they also live within.
I think you're going a little too far on that.
Say that one more time.
Yeah, if everyone could mute.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay. So essentially, we want to make sure that our community members across the country have the ability to recycle something properly, as easy as it is to throw things away. So what that means is that because we're a 501c3, we put private dollars to work in communities by investing in infrastructure like recycling carts. And in some cases, we will invest in recycling trucks to help optimize community programs and systems. We also empower strong peer-to-peer networks to share and learn from each other to help continue to drive change into the system. So some of you may have been aware of us through our 50 City Summit. We recently held a 50 State Summit at Resource Recycling. We also have a municipal Facebook group just for industry professionals as well, to also continue to build those peer-to-peer networking group. We are a data and research-driven org, so we conduct research that will help us to continue to understand the current challenges that are being faced to the system. And then we utilize our abilities to help develop technical solutions for communities to meet those challenges. We also provide proven residential education that is intended to make it easy for your community partners to engage in their system. And we do that by helping to make your systems run better. The communications and education is intended to help decrease contamination, like we're going to talk about today, and also increase participation, getting them to actually engage effectively within your programs. This is a map of the partnership and how we've worked from coast to coast and deployed our various resources or best management practices or granted out funding to help support the system at large. So we're everywhere. We were formed in 2014, and since then we've seen substantial benefits to the circular system. So if you're familiar with our website and have gone on there, we put a lot of reports on there, and one of the most recent one was put out in July of 2022, and that's our impact report that details all of the impact that we have had on the circular system since our inception. So as you can see here, we have carted over 1.3 million communities, or placed carts in almost placed over 1.3 million carts in communities since 2014. We have reached over 100 million households, and that's with a very small staff. We started out, I think, 5 people in staff, and now we've grown to a staff of 80 or more, almost 90 team members. Let's go. Hold on, my slide is, there we go. So in terms of contamination reduction, we look at it in terms of operation and education, and we want to blend those 2 components and meet in the middle. What are the primary objectives of operations and education, and where they are synchronity? So we want to stimulate buy-in. We want to make sure that your community residents or your community members expand their knowledge base, that therefore leads their commitment for active engagement in your recycling programs. And that in itself will lead to increased participation, increased quality. And the way that we do that is by making sure that we develop communications plans and programs to help reinforce that. So level setting on how we are communicating with people, it's very important to remember that people are very people-y. And so a lot of times, what we believe is resistance is often a lack of clarity. Through research, we've identified that behavior is very complex because humans engage in patterns that are normalized for them, right? And so we want to develop your communications plan based on that general understanding of just human behavior around human behavior and patterns. So it's important, as those of us who are really embedded within this industry, to not make assumptions. And I know it can be really easy to do that because a lot of us work and live in these communities. We know our neighbors, we provide the service, but it's very easy to start leaning into assumptions. And because we are a data and research-driven org, we encourage everyone to put all of their assumptions aside and measure instead. So you should be measuring your communications to some extent to know if whatever you're doing currently is actually accomplishing your intended goals. So there should be measurement. You also should focus on changing one distinct behavior at a time. And I'll go over further into the presentation today, like why we would do that. There's a basic psychology behind focusing in on one element for a behavior change versus overloading your community members with a multiple of actions that you want them to adopt. And then we want to also make sure that communications are developed with the purpose to help move people from just basic awareness or caring to feeling like they are knowledgeable about the system that they're asked to engage in. And that galvanizes them to act and to do and to participate well in their program. And once they get there, they're often the recycling or waste diversion champion for your community. And they in turn then take that knowledge and they share it with their community members who they are close to. And so you create a system in which everyone is able to engage in a healthy and efficient manner. So if you're looking at the screen, you're probably familiar with some of these slogans. I have also used some of these slogans in the past, right? Clean it up, don't communicate, and keep it green. If I were to ask you if these slogans or these statements, are they giving a clear direction to members of your community? Do they tell them anything specific to do? They do not, right? These don't give clear, tangible directions. They're great slogans. They're great for remembering. They're great for driving awareness. But we want to actually tell our community members what we want them to do. You should tell them what you want them to do so that they can participate in the way that you would like them to in your programs. So we're asking community partners, as you're building communications plan, to be very careful about your wording. Instead of vague wording, lean into being very clear and concise. Clarity is kindness. It is much better to tell your community members that you want them to keep caps on their plastic bottles than to tell them to keep it clean, right? It is clearer and kinder for them to, and easier for them to understand what you're expecting if you tell them, do not bag your recyclables versus keeping it green. And of course, insert what you want them to recycle here, right? So recycle your cans, recycle your plastic bottles, recycle your cardboard. Those are very clear, tangible directions that are easy for your community members to understand, and it empowers them to engage properly in your programs. So when we're talking about like human behavior, we also have to look at how people metabolize the message that you put out. So we have to understand that the average attention span is roughly 8 seconds. That's not a long time to remember anything, right? 8 seconds is literally a blip. And then within that 8-second attention span, they can really only remember up to 7 items on average in a sequential order. So this is really important because in recycling, we're usually asking them to remember specific items that they can put in their bin or put in their cart. And if we don't have clarity on how people consume and metabolize information and what some of those limitations are, we may make the mistake of being overly wordy and providing too much information that then makes your community members feel like they can't remember what's supposed to go in the recycling or what's not supposed to go in. They're putting in the wrong material at any given time. It feels like we're changing what can and can't be accepted because we've provided a very long list. Instead, lean into refocusing their thought process on just what is the basic material that can go in their stream, that can go in their bin, can go in their cart. Cardboard, glass, metal, plastics, and paper, right? And you can modify these to better fit what you need, but the overall intent is to keep it simple. Add visual elements that reinforce your messaging. Visual elements are important because of the limitations of attention span and the ability to recall items in sequential order as well too. So a visual element is really helpful in helping support memory retention. And it also gives your community members tangible visual reminders they're going to see in their normal consumer behavior as they're just living their daily life, going to the supermarket, right? You want to make sure that things are things that you're putting up for them to see and consume are things that they see every day, right? So on the left, I've also done this at various times in my, baby stages of working in the industry. But again, shifting away and understanding that people are people and really putting the focus on just really understanding how people consume and metabolize information gets us more to the right, where we're looking at simplifying our messaging.
Shannon, a quick question. Do you see any issues with specific product identification like the Cheerios box or the...
No, not for us. So on a legal aspect, we have permission to use all of these images, and everything that we have for the partnership that is made available on our website is free to use for all communities. So there's no issues. All of these companies actually given a green light for this stuff to be used. But there is no issue because in essence, as a consumer, they're going to be able to easily identify this Cheerio box versus if you put another image here that they now have to spend a little bit of time trying to figure out what this box actually is, right? It seems like it would be easy to make that leap, but often we're not considering that we're asking those questions from the industry perspective and not from the layman perspective. The layman has less time to consume and consider that, and it's smarter to just use what is visually available to them within their communities. More recently, we're also looking at trans-creational content. So some of these images here, like the Mount Olive pickle bottle and things like that, you might not actually use that images because you might not have that consumed in wide numbers within your community. If the community is more like culturally specific, you might see other cultural products that are in the supermarkets reflected in your imagery. Or you should rather use that.
Thanks.
Okay. So this just highlights what I was talking about earlier about how we want to drive behavior patterns. So oftentimes, because we're limited in the municipal side and the public side with budgeting, and we're trying to be really cost effective, right? We'll look at awareness vehicles as a way of stimulating behavior change, but that doesn't actually do that. So we have to do more because billboards or traditional media, like putting an ad in the newspaper or digital ads that get run up on a website, those are great for driving home awareness, but they're not necessarily the best vehicle for stimulating behavior change or for even getting your community member along the lines of knowledge, because sometimes you're limited to spacing as well. So you want to look at it like as a flow chart where you want to take things that are intended to drive awareness, but also look at incorporating items or vehicles that are going to help enforce expanding knowledge base. That's where doing a hauler informational piece or annual mailer that goes out to your community residents or community partners every year or twice a year. Maybe you do an entire like catalog that encompasses all of the recycling or waste diversion programs that is available to residents or community members within your area. And you provide that information out to them, and it's easy for them to access and get to. So it could be a direct mailer to their home. You could post it on your website, add different links and options of how to route them to what they need. But then you also want to get them along the path of, now that they have this knowledge, they want to engage. Things that you could use to engage with is like cart tags, which we'll talk about later. But quizzes, newsletters, and blogs, all of these things are intended to have your community partners actively participate and engage the knowledge that they're using, and then shift them along the lines of advocacy, where they now are the supporters of your program. They then take that knowledge again and may share it out with other people in their community to help continue to build and support the program. So driving awareness, I'll go through these really quickly. These are essentially what we use as a three-prong approach to our cart infrastructure, which is we do an awareness element where you do a billboard, but we also want to expand knowledge. So we promote sending out some informational cards. That the informational card could also include the calendar of service. It can also include FAQs, frequently asked questions that you devise based on what your community needs are. And then you could do some additional supportive awareness pieces by way of like bill inserts or digital ads. So this is just a visual representation of doing these things more than once and in different ways. Again, another example, communities have also done like retractable banners. You set up like a display in a community lobby of a library. You can do bus shelter ads or bus ads on the bus itself. You can do newspaper ads, posters, or even just use your collection trucks as a moving billboard. So these are just examples that you could use to deploy the messaging itself. Same for digital awareness. If you don't have a web page dedicated to recycling, you should. And that web page should make sure it's listing out all the essential information to help support expanding the knowledge base, such as like what can and cannot be recycled, what are the questions that your residents are going to ask about their service, giving clear and distinct guidance on how to engage with the recycling for service day, so cart placement, what time they should put material out at the curb to be picked up. So you want to make sure that you are creating a space that's easy for your community members to access and learn more about the recycling program. And once they're engaging, we want them to engage well, so that way we're capturing as much material as possible, but we want to capture quality material. So we also want to make sure we are addressing contamination. So do I still have time?
You're doing fine.
Okay, good.
Fine. Yeah.
All right. So contamination, we're going to get straight on contamination. By the partnership's definition, contamination is anything that is wrong, placed wrongly in the actual recycling system itself. So the raw material goes in the wrong system, or the right material is not prepared correctly. That's our definition of contamination, not to be confused with the MRF residue. Going back to the EPA's average of contamination rate. So we know, just using the EPA standard, communities are facing over 20% on average contamination, and that has a cost to the system through money, time, and of course, safety hazards and liability for workers. So our goal is to help start to bring that down through our Feet on the Street program, or like boots on the street. And so our Feet on the Street program is a systematic approach that provides direct feedback at the curb for your community members that is intended to help stimulate the behavior change that we want to see, to help encourage them to actively participate in their recycling system in an effective way. So our approach to deploying our Feet on the Street program is a 3-pronged approach. We use an inform and trigger for the first part of the approach, and that's when we send out a informational mailer to every single recycling eligible household in either the entirety of the community, or it can just be in your specific subset of the community that you're targeting, because you could narrow this down to focus on just specific areas that you're seeing contamination issues in. But you want to essentially inform and trigger by sending out something that is intended to get residents informed about what can and cannot go in their recycling. You start building. From there, you're going to bequeath with the power provided to you by whatever community you live in. You're going to bequeath your recycling knights, also known as inspectors or auditors or feet on the street, to go out into your targeted area of your community or the entirety of the community, whichever method or approach you're using. But they're going to go and they're going to walk through the community and they're going to open up the recycling carts on service day ahead of the actual pickup trucks. And they're going to look in the carts. They're not going to dig around in there. They're just going to take a quick visual assessment on the top layer, things that they can actually see without touching the inside of the material. And they're going to look on the tag that they're going to take out with them into this field. And they're going to identify the items, no more than 6 items that shouldn't be in this stream. You get to those 6 items by having collaborative discussions with your MRF, or maybe you already know this, but this tag is going to only reflect the items that you've identified through your normal audit of your material, the material that is most problematic. And your recycling inspector or night, or whatever you want to call them, they're going to go and they're going to mark that off. They're going to then affix a tag to their cart or to the bin. And if it's cart, they're going to flip the cart around, and that's going to give the driver on that route a non-verbal cue that this particular cart does not get service for the day. This part of the actual program is important because this is the part that gives your community members direct feedback. When Jacob or Allie comes home from work or picking up the kids from daycare or doing that Target run, they're going to come back and see that their recycling hasn't been picked up. They're going to have a tag, a tangible piece of information placed on their cart that tells them what was wrong in their actual container, and they're given the opportunity to course correct, right? The course correct is what is actually going to stimulate the behavior, because our assumption is they put the cart out in good faith, meaning they want to recycle. They just didn't do it well this time around. We give them the ability to rise to the occasion to do that. And so they can remove the material from the cart, put the cart back out for service, either on the next service day, or you develop a plan to do like pickup service, backup pickup service. But usually it's on the next service day, just because operationally it makes the most sense. And then halfway through the actual campaign, most campaigns are done on a 4-pass minimum. So this can vary. If you are serviced weekly, then you can anticipate a minimum of 4 weeks for a campaign. If you're every other week, minimum would be roughly 8 weeks or so. And so halfway through, you're going to go ahead and send out a follow-up mailer. And this mailer, going back to what I talked about earlier, focusing on just one behavior change at a time, it's going to be an issue-specific mailer, issue-specific communication that's only going to focus on one thing that you want your community member to do. So in this scenario that we see on the screen, we don't want them to bag their recyclables. So all of the subsequent top issue or issue-specific communications are going to focus on that itself. And so you will audit your material before you even launch this program. And then after you do the program, you go back and do another audit to see and measure, was the tagging successful? So this is just a quick slide that shows and highlights all of the communications pieces that would go into in a Feet on the Street program. You could do more, but these are the basic components that you would need, which is the info card, cart tags, and top issue. But now I want to talk about what are some of the results of doing our Feet on the Street program. We've deployed this across the country in a multitude of communities, and we see success with everyone. So this is actual real data taken from Tucson, Arizona. Tucson has an every other week collection program. So this ran for 8 weeks with 4 specific passes. Each household gets passed at least 4 times. we saw a steady decline in their tagging rates. That's the number of tags that were deployed, meaning that's the number of contamination occurrences that were visible to the recycling auditor that was canvassing the area. So you could see there's a relative reduction here of about 60%, quick math. So they went from 44% tagging rate on the very first task all the way down, declining steadily to 18% by the time we got to the final pass. So what does that mean for contamination? Well, again, real data. This is also taken from Orange County, Florida, distinctly different areas of the country, right? But you can see here, we ran this program, identical for all the same BMP, 4 passes. We're going to do an info mailer, do the canvassing in the area, come back and do an issue specific, audit, pre and post. What is your contamination? 45% to start. After the actual campaign itself, they've dropped to 32%. That's roughly a 30% or so relative reduction in contamination. But in a lot of the communities we've worked with, we're seeing upwards of 45% relative reduction in their actual contamination, as long as they're following the general BMPs that we have outlined in our contamination reduction plan. So we know that our communication method is effective, right? We measure. Highlighting again, done in another part of the country. We worked with the state of Ohio, with the Ohio EPA. We did a grant project with them. It was about 2 years. And so we identified 5 distinct communities, but I'm only gonna feature 3 here because one of them wasn't, 2 of them didn't follow the BMPs directly. So these 3 followed to the T, and the other 2 had some nuances for varying like differentiation between their granting structure. But 3 here, again, just standard contamination reduction, the 3-pronged approach. You could see there's a small, large, and medium-sized community listed here to show that it doesn't necessarily matter the size of the community because we're focusing on the actual behavior itself, which is a pattern that we're trying to shift. So in Fairfield, again, relative reduction, 44%. Akron saw a 40% reduction, and Centerville saw a 43% reduction. It's roughly an average across the stream, like 40 across these 3, like 42%. If I were to factor in the others that weren't necessarily guided, they're about 35, 36% relative reduction across the entirety of all the projects we ran in Ohio that did the actual field on the street work. So again, very effective in helping to reduce contamination, regardless of the actual size of your community.
Keysha, I've got a question here from Data Junkie, and I'm going to read this because if I try to paraphrase it, I'll screw it up. Andrew wants to know, what was the variance, if any, in setouts during the tagging program? And did the total setouts and the volume collected remain close to the same over the period, or were there households that dropped out?
Yes. So I actually had a slide in here. I took it out for time. I got a little worried because I had a lot. It was getting long in the tooth. So set out remains relatively stable. What we do often see is after between pass 1 and pass 2. So pass 2 is usually when there is the most notable dip. It'll dip because sometimes residents will get passive aggressive because of the tagging. But what we see by pass 3 and 4 and beyond, it restabilizes. Residents just adopt the pattern of behavior and they go right back to their normal set out rate. So it's not enough for us to like include anywhere because it doesn't actually make a difference. They just engage as normal outside of that initial occurrence. And when we're accounting that for being like, they're just annoyed that you have done this, but they want the actual service and it's not actually inhibiting their ability anyway. And they still are consuming as normal consumers in their daily life. They need the service, so they continue to engage. Excellent. So no, we don't see a volume reduction. We don't see a general dip in the set out in any way that's substantial. It basically just stabilizes and remains consistent throughout the entirety of the tagging program.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So sorry, going back. So again, highlighting Michigan Eagle. We've done this in Michigan Eagle. We have a grant with the Michigan Eagle is the Environmental Great Lakes and Energy. So they are a state entity or a statewide organization. We have also done a collaboration with to do statewide granting throughout the state of Michigan. In that granting effort, we're doing not just feet on the street, but we're also doing like drop off community work as well too. But I'm going to look at the actual curbside feet on the street effects. So we did run this in like 6 specific communities there. As you can see here, the average reduction in contamination across all of the communities we've worked with for the state there is 36%. It's a really good drop in their contamination from start to end after deploying our reduction BMPs. And like Ohio, a mixture of small, medium to large scale communities. So again, really, I'm just trying to highlight that it's not the size of the community. It really does boil down to just basic behavior patterns for people, and people tend to just be very people-y. So we want to keep that in mind. You could do this in drop-off. Let's say you don't have a curbside program. You only have a drop-off collection program for your community. That happens, right? Some communities don't have the infrastructure for curb-based collection. You could still do a feet on the street style program in a drop-off scenario. It's going to follow the same 3-prong approach. You're going to do some sort of informant trigger, and this is usually through signage as you're entering the actual drop-off area, signage on the containers themselves, roll-offs, or whatever collection sorting material container that you're using on the actual site. Personalized feedback that we would normally do at the curb, that gets transitioned to on-site staff at the drop-off locations. If you have on-site staff, they're going to be there to give direct feedback as community members are engaging at the drop-off itself. They're going to hand them informational cards. They may hand out an oops card if you deploy at the drop-off. But they're going to give the feedback, right? And they are also be able to give the encouragement. Oh, I see a question.
Keysha, another quick question here. Have you ever done a comparison with secured versus unsecured carts pertaining to contamination?
Unsecured and secured meaning the lids are lockable?
Yes.
No, we've not done a comparison. I don't think we've worked with a community to date with secured carts. No, I don't believe we've done a community with secured carts.
Okay.
But I would be interested in that. So Stell, if you could share any community that does have secured carts, I would be actually interested in that. So thank you for that question. I wish I had a better answer, but I feel like we might be going somewhere.
That works.
So drop off, following up. So California right now. Okay. So we're also looking to do, so Estelle, can I message you? Can we message off of this webinar? Because I do believe we're trying to work. Thank you. Perfect. So I'm going to continue for sake of time, and I want to take up everyone's time. So on the third part, after the personalized feedback at the drop off, you're going to do some issue specific communications. That can be done a multitude of ways. You can still do a mailer instead to households in your community. You could do A-frame boards leading in and up along the drive and traffic flow within your drop off. You could do other media like billboards or digital ads or mobile ads, but again, just using issue specific communications for that instead. This is an example of the basics that would go into a drop off, contamination reduction, info card, oops card, top issue, and because of the nature of drop off and traffic control, some sandwich boards would be really beneficial. I'll go through this really quickly. I just wanted to give you a bigger slide so you can visually see better the info cards itself and how they could be modified. If you have drop off, you would expand it so it's a little bit larger to include multiple drop off locations for residents, and that could be a direct mailer. So now you're informing them of where they can engage appropriately in their recycling systems. You could update your drop-off signage. We do have a sign builder on our website as well too that you could use to customize and build out signage specific for your drop-off programs. There's multitude of sizes that you can choose from. So there are sizes for dumpsters, even desk side bins as well too, or Slim Jim containers, they still call them that. You could use our sign builder on our website to do this as well too. The oops tag, again, like curbside, you're going to identify just the items that are specific to the stream that are problematic for marking off that you don't want. And then you could use the backside of that tag as the reinforcement tool of here's what you can recycle instead as well. in terms of doing awareness pieces to help support the awareness, you could still deploy printed, direct mail, or digital ads that will reinforce recycling awareness and behavior. So don't bag recycling. Again, being specific, no styrofoam. In Misaki County, they were focused on removing styrofoam and EPS foam from their actual system. So this is actually a digital element that ran in their community. And then it would be best for, since it's a drop off, whether it's manned or not, it's helpful to have an information station. And this is going to be really integral, especially kind of post-pandemic where we are now, in being mindful that people may still want to continue to social distance. But if you have a station that is relatively close to the actual dropping off, the container itself, you can then put into those information station all of the content information that's available for community members to engage with their recycling program. You could also then use that information area or station for potentially like social distancing mechanisms like we see here. So in terms of the pandemic, we recognize that being socially distanced is important to still a subset of the community. So the approach here has not been fully tested given the nature of the pandemic for everyone. We're all still adjusting a little bit, and now we're adjusting to new norms, I think, this year. But part of that is also considering just low touch, like instead of using signage on site that allows you to shift and show from a distance whether or not the material is accepted as poor, fair, or good, but just more low touch elements can be deployed. You can get really creative here in that scenario. Have we done the drop-off contamination reduction in other areas? We have. We've run this again, like I said, in communities in Michigan, where we had a grant project with Michigan Eagle to deploy this. They are going to see a little bit less contamination reduction, and that is because by nature of being source separated, drop-off locations do tend to be cleaner, even though they often are faced with challenges with illegal or illicit dumping. The material stream is usually still a little bit cleaner. But still, if you look here, some significant reduction across the board, 26% relative reduction in contamination that was present before versus after.
Keysha, any sense of why it looks like some of these counties were substantially improved and there were some that very little difference at all? Was there any demographics or any attributes of their systems that would make them more susceptible to improvement?
Some of it would be demographics, distance to drop-off locations, whether or not they had more than one drop-off. And then it would also vary in terms of if some of these communities may not deploy the same full pattern, like where we get into the awareness piece, some may not have used sandwich boards or digital ads, some may have only done a mailer and had direct handouts at the drop-off, or there may be unmanned drop-off locations rolled into these numbers as well too, and you're going to see higher contamination with unmanned sites. So that would be the variance. Any other questions before I move on?
We're good so far. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So additional tools and resources, because that essentially wraps up the effectiveness of our contamination program and the way that we encourage communities to engage with their residents, both from a curbside or a drop-off aspect. But there are other tools and resources that we do have available. We are, again, like I said, a 501c3. We use all of the data and the research that we amass to develop resources for communities to use. And they're all free on our website to access. So there are social media toolkits. So let's say you don't think you're a social media person, that's fine. I'm actually not a social media person either, but I can tell you when I was running my communities program in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I also had to run more of the rural collection programs for Doña Ana County itself, where we had a lot of smaller pueblos. I still use a lot of the social media toolkits that were actually developed by the partnership that predates me joining the partnership. And I really appreciated that all of that information had like predetermined language or pre-selected language that I could customize and modify. The graphics were highly visible and they increased the engagement on my own community social media pages. So I really appreciated not having to think about it as much as someone who doesn't actually engage in social media that often. So I have dropped this in here as a link because I recommend things that I know I found useful when I was in the public side and trying to really communicate well with my community members. The toolkit that I've referenced for both the curbside and the drop-off, 2 distinctly different kits. We have modified and updated these toolkits since their first launch, I think in 2015. So it's more robust. There's worksheets for the budget, how to work out a budget for the communications and the operations and logistics in there as well too. If you are going to do manual tracking of your cart tags as you're deploying them, there is a spreadsheet that is developed to allow you to amass and track and measure as well too. So I can't speak more highly of these toolkits because they are really helpful, and they're actually, the curbside toolkit is what I used when I deployed feet on the street in my community in Las Cruces, again, before I joined the partnerships. I know coming from the opposite end, that they were really useful. So you can download these and access them, you go through it, look at what is in the guides and start deploying them or planning today. The takeaway, the contamination reduction resources that you're going to need that you could develop. Again, you need OOPS tags can be done directly through our website. We have a campaign builder and DIY sign builder that will customize all the communication stuff that you would need and could use today. The OOPS tags can be developed there. You can identify issue-specific items to place on your tags as well too. There's a MRF survey. The MRF survey is really helpful in engaging with your MRF annually, at minimum annually, on what is a prohibitive in your stream versus what is just restricted or what's accepted. And then it'll help you understand, as things are shifting around us in terms of consumer behavior, what are the contaminations that your processor is dealing with on a routine basis. If you are in the hauling end of things, there is a material tracking form that you can use with your drivers, or the haulers who have drivers. You can use those for them to track as well. Like, what are the inbound loads coming into the drop-off sites or the transfer station? So you can kind of grade the material stream that's coming in, real quick assessment. It gives, all these tools are intended to help you measure and make the changes that you have identified as necessary for your program. And then we just updated this year our feet on the street training video. So this video, I put the link in here and it should play as well from this presentation, but this is a walkthrough. It's very instructional from start to finish on how you're going to deploy the feet on the street program. And in terms of tracking, it'll also make a reference to whether or not you're using the app versus manual tracking in field. So these are like really great tools and resources that you can start using today for your contamination reduction. So we're at the end. I feel like I talked a lot, but if you guys have any questions or feedback, this is that slide. So challenges to measuring is if you have not been measuring to begin with, or you don't have a good working relationship with your MRF. So that goes back to your MRF contract. If you have a contract with a processor, what we've seen is that a lot of processing agreements across the country are lacking some key components that would give communities the tooth for auditing. So you want to build that relationship. And if you have the opportunity to renegotiate your processing, if you don't already have auditing in there, you should include some material audits for your community. If you have a relationship that's fairly productive with your processor, you're going to want to work with them to maybe do a segregated collection, and you can do a sort of the material on site as well too. That would be the challenge, is like, who is going to execute on the material sort pre and post, and if that's already factored into your agreement. That would be the major challenges. The way that we normally support that is through our granting work. We have actually provided the funds to cover those measurements.
Got a QR code question there.
Yep. So let's see. Have you incorporated QR codes? So yes, we have incorporated QR codes. We've had some discussion about dynamic versus static QR codes. Static meaning that if there is a change to the URL, that QR code may not actually update. And dynamic is that if there are changes to the back end of your URL, it should automatically also update. But we do use them. In fact, we actually encourage them in different ways. So like when you are, if you're a cart-based program and say you're looking at doing labels on your carts, well, instead of a really deep dive into what can go on your in your recycling on the lid, instead use a QR code that redirects your community members to your website. And that gives you the ability to provide more detailed, clear instructions. QR codes are also great for just tracking or sending people where you want them to go. Let's say you wanted to do a survey, measuring your communications currently. You could develop a Google survey, use the QR code to send community members there to give feedback on what you're currently doing. So you can use the QR codes in a multitude of ways, and we are actually using them in various methods throughout all of our granting initiatives.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I did want to ask.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The reason I asked about QR codes is we're starting to use them, but we're finding that it's a change of behavior, that it's almost like we're training them to get used to this. And I didn't know there's different groups, like the older folks kind of still want that paper, and we will, but the QR code with the young folks are just so savvy on that technology. So I wasn't sure how to incorporate that or to get to success for incorporating that. So.
No, I 100% agree with you. We've had a similar conversation within the last 3 weeks with Kansas City, where the staff members there essentially said they don't want to do QR codes because they have a community that wouldn't really use them. And so my point was, at least to them, was, but you're also excluding segments of your community that are still younger and are able to use it. Having one doesn't negate having the other. Like they can be true at the same time and it exists in the same space. You just want to give accessibility to all of your community members. You don't want to exclude.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then Helen, so we do have clear examples for how you should word things in your contracts. I'm going to put in the chat box. There's a link to our MRF contracts guide. So I am actually the subject matter expert for our org on MRF contracts. And if you actually do want to do a deep dive on your contracts and have some recommendation on your language, if you're going to do a new RFP or just renegotiate like a renewal, you're free to send me what you got. And I am more than willing to like read through your agreement and make any kind of notes and recommendations to help support you. I'm open to it. And that's for everyone on the call. But there are specific language that we do recommend. The toolkit or the kit that I just put in the link, at the very end of that actual guide, there's an appendix, and the appendix has examples for every single 11 essential items that we recommend that you should have in your contract.
Got time for one more here, Keysha. How about Shannon's question about the triangle versus the circle?
So I am not the person that makes that decision. We still use a recycling symbol because in some ways, the community members recognize that symbol. I don't think they necessarily look at the recycling symbol versus the circular symbol in the ways that we as the industry professionals do. So we are aware of the difference between how we're communicating with our target audience. But I couldn't say for certain if we're going to move away from the triangle. I think if we're communicating to laymen, absolutely not, probably. But internally, we also do use like the infinity circle.
Great stuff. Well, I think in terms of being visual and graphic, I discovered this morning when I was poking around looking for some interesting attempts to reduce contamination. And hopefully nobody is sharing their hamster or gerbil recycle bin. I'm sure that somebody out there has seen that and more. So this has really been a wonderful presentation today, Keysha. Remind everybody to mark your calendars. We have all these great events coming up. And if you're not a member, we're a 501c3 just like the recycling partnership, and we depend upon dues and sponsor support to keep ourselves going. So really look to everyone in the community, the paying members and the non-paying members to support our work. So before we go, let's have a big round of applause. Have a standing ovation for Keysha. Great stuff today. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to hopefully seeing everybody in November, and hopefully maybe Keysha will bring you back again. You can talk about doing the contracts thing, because I think that's an area where people are very interested in trying to figure out what are the metrics I put in place to make sure we're getting where we want to go. So,
oh yeah, definitely. I could probably talk all day about that one too. I mean, a lot of contracts.
Excellent. Okay, thanks everybody. Keysha,
Thanks all.
thank you.
Thank you.
Stay
Thank you.
well.
Have a good one.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.